My name is Dr. Nathan Groot. I am a music instructor at the Arkansas School for Mathematics, Sciences, and the Arts, where I teach string ensemble, applied string lessons, and other music courses. Today we are going to go over the Hebrides Overture by Felix Mendelssohn. This excerpt is for the All-State audition from Set 1. This is just All-State, not All-Region. So this excerpt is split into two parts. Let's just start with the first part and then we'll do the second part. We'll just go in order. Seems like the easiest way to do it. So there might be some disagreement among reasonable people about the best fingering for this opening. And I think that really it has to do with what your priorities are, whether it's keeping things on fewer strings or whether it's intonation. If you're able to play really in tune in third position, you can go with my fingering. If that's going to take away from your audition, then doing whatever fingering you can best play in tune is probably the best bet. My fingering involves starting each of these figures with a fourth finger. So what that means is we start out in third position, G and C string again. And then for the next figure, we go down to first position, fourth finger A. And then the printed fingering that's in there, that is sort of the reason I chose this fingering, because just to stay consistent with what's going on, this is printed, fourth finger in third position again. And then a printed fingering, first position. So using this fingering keeps things really consistent. I think this is probably a best case scenario type fingering. If you're practicing it and it just sounds really out of tune and you're, maybe not quite sure if you can get it, consult with your teacher about it. It may be a matter of just practicing more, getting more comfortable with third position, but if this is just being really stubborn and not wanting to sound good, it's always better to play it more in tune than with the preferred fingering, unless that fingering is specifically required. There's another fingering I'd like to share with you, and that is something that happens on the second and third lines. So this last measure that starts with a D natural, I like to shift up to second position. And I know not all of us love second position, but it's so useful if you just make friends with it. So shifting up from here, we're going from an E, the last 16th note, and actually at this point we should be at the frog, up to a third finger D. That's so that we can get that E in there. Then, for beats 3 and 4, I like to just go over to first position on the D string, using that open D to shift down. Let me show you that again in slow motion. So, second position, first position. Then, the next measure is the same material. I use the open D in measure 10 to, shift up to second position. Again, shift down to first. The rest of it can all be done in first position. just keeping in mind a few things about the bow that we'll talk about. So there are a few things you're really going to want to bring out in this. You're going to want to make sure that accents are happening and that hairpins, crescendos and decrescendos, are happening, so that that's really obvious. You might want to even go a little bit over the top, maybe even beyond what you think is necessary, because your audience, in this case the adjudicators at the audition, will want to not be questioning, I wonder if they did that crescendo, but you'll want your adjudicators to be blown away by how much of a crescendo and how much contrast you're getting. That will make a big difference in the audition. Now, the absolute most important part of this first half of the excerpt is keeping the phrase going through our use of the bow. And in particular, we're talking about smooth string crossings. So when we think about our bow, sometimes we think about 4 string levels, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's true to an extent, but what that does sometimes is it creates these choppy string crossings, especially if it's under a slur. And what that does is it breaks up our phrasing. If we have a phrase that we're trying to draw out, that can make that phrase not sound as unified, as continuous. And this is a case where we're really going to want to make things sound continuous. So what I want to encourage you to do is, instead of thinking of 4 distinct, sort of far away string levels going on here, think about all the many different, almost just infinite number of angles you can find in here, and how gradually we can actually move back and forth between these things. So, for example, in the first measure, if we do a choppy string crossing, we risk having an artificial accent, but we also risk sort of breaking that figure up. Meanwhile, if we very gradually change from one string to another, it will make it more smooth. One way to test this is to play it a little bit out of rhythm, so that you can slow down, sort of play that string crossing in slow motion, and see if you can get a little bit of a double stop. So you're melding from one string to both strings to the other string. I'll show you what I mean by that. When you're going fast, you won't hear that double stop, of course. It's not actually written. We don't actually want a double stop there. But we want to almost imagine it, to kind of threaten to play a double stop a little bit. And what that'll do is it'll make that string crossing really super smooth. Another place that you're really going to want to focus on that is, for example, our other favorite place, measure 9. Feeling that as being really super smooth. Try playing it with just open strings, imagining just what your fingers would be doing. So sometimes I even like to use my finger against my thumb. Having a really nice smooth string crossing there, it's a great way to practice that. Alright, so let's just sort of walk through the second half of this excerpt. Starts with a B. That's technically in the bracket, so we should play the downbeat. And then we have E sharp. What the heck is an E sharp? It is inharmonically equivalent to F natural. So if that's a little easier to think of, you can think of it that way. It requires us to shift up into second position, but you can sort of just think of it as, okay, I know where E is, boom, plus a half step. Just think of it plus a half step. Move that whole hand so that you can find it. So we play B, over a fifth, up a half step. Practice that a few times with your tuner. Make sure you're getting the right note. So we have, we can play that E sharp, G sharp, E sharp, G sharp, A sharp, C sharp, A sharp, C sharp. These are not easy notes, but we can do it. A sharp, if it helps, you can think of it enharmonically as a B flat. But you don't need to shift for that. You can stay in second position. The first place I like to shift is on that fourth beat of the measure, down to a low 1 in half position for that D sharp. And then on the next measure, shifting up to a first finger, just on E natural. For the A sharp, in, what is that, measure 245 on beat 3, I like to just use a high 1. You could technically use a low 2, but what that would mean is you would have to move from a high 2 to a low 2. And I think at a fast tempo, it's just too dangerous. So instead, I have my 2, and I just think about that first finger coming up. Same stuff repeats again. But in measure 248, instead of just ending with an eighth note B like we did before, we continue on. And it just keeps on going. Couple of notes here. At the end of that line, at the end of 248, I like to play 2, 1, 1, 4, 1. It kind of breaks a little bit of a rule about crossing a string for just one note, but I can't really think of a better option here. If you or your teacher come up with one, that's feel free to use that, of course, as always. But this is the one that I use. So going on from 249, I'm sort of going between half position and first position there, 2, 1, 1, and then I don't go 1, 1, 1 there. I go 1, 1, 2 on beat 3 there. There's an important little thing with the bowing here on beat 3. I do a small, in the key there being small, a small retake. I also, during that retake, shift from half position to first position, from a 2 on the E to a 3 on the C natural. But the reason I do that is if you don't do that, you're going to end up backwards. And it's super duper duper awkward. You want to have down up on your 16th notes. Because down bows sound heavier and it'll sound sort of shuffly and weird if you end up backwards there. Just continues on that way. The other place I do a retake is in 254. Same reason, we just don't want it to be backwards. These are things that are not written, but are implied by bowings that come later. For example, the up bow in 256 implies that we have to do a retake 2 measures before that. In this stretch, after 251, 252, 253, we have these sforzandos, we have these accents, we have things that need to be emphasized. I would recommend just with the bow using primarily extra weight to achieve those changes. So just leaning into that note, and make sure that you are including those at your slowest tempo, because that will just translate as you speed it up. So at letter I, or 255, we have this whole note trill. It presents us with a few little issues. One being the grace notes at the end, the other being this sort of weird bowing that's going on in the measure after that. How many trills you put in, I don't think is necessarily that important as long as you put them in. The most important thing about a trill, generally speaking, is when to stop it. Because if you wait too long, you're going to end up messing with your rhythm. So you're going to want to be counting really carefully. 1, 2, 3, 4, and a 1, making sure that those grace notes happen. So I would start, and this does happen on a down bow, I would start practicing it without the trill. 1, 2, 3, 4, and a 1. going through like that, then adding the trill. Don't be afraid to add a little bit of just a split second at the end where you're not trilling, because the important thing is that those grace notes happen and the downbeat of 256 happens at the right time. So once we finish figuring out that trill, we have a little bit of a bow problem in 256. We're at the tip, or at least the upper half. But we really need to get towards the balance point for what is coming, this big crescendo, all these 16th notes. We do not want to be playing those out at the tip at all. We want to be near the balance point for that. So you can use that first eighth note to get us a little bit closer. And then for the remainder, if you need to work your way up, you can be a little bit sneaky with how you use these 16th notes. Less, more, less, more, less, more. Now, when you're using less, more bow, you have to be careful not to make it sound sort of swung or offbeat or anything like that. We want to make sure that it still maintains integrity of the hierarchy of beats of ta 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 ta. So we need to regulate our weight, speed, contact point, primarily weight, to make this not sound sort of upside down and weird. To make sure that we're working our way up to the frog or to the balance point at the very least without sort of changing the rhythm or changing how this feels metrically. Going on, we have a crescendo, accent, C sharp, don't forget. And then just third position. Might feel weird ending there, but that's where the excerpt ends. So, next thing we're going to do is I'm just going to play it through at different tempos. Keep in mind that this is not necessarily the best way for you to practice, although I do invite you, if you'd like, to try to play along. There are a lot of other ways to practice other than just playing it through and increasing your metronome marking. In fact, that's usually not the best way to practice. So as you're practicing, make sure you are tearing things apart, being a problem solver, looking through your problem spots and thinking about them in creative ways. If you need help with that, just let me know. That's something I really enjoy talking about, so I'd be happy to talk to you about it. All that being said, we're still going to go through and I'm going to play it for you at different tempos just so you can hear it at a tempo that is not full speed. So we're going to start at 60 and then do 70, 80, 90, and then 100 with a metronome, so you can also hear that. I highly recommend always practicing this with a metronome, at least right up until before the audition. I hope this was somewhat useful for you. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, either in the comments below or on any of my social media or through my website. I would love to hear from you and be happy to talk to you about this excerpt or others. I wish you the very best of luck in your upcoming audition, and happy practicing.